Yes. And I think one of the challenges in our culture is that we're uncomfortable being uncomfortable.
Yes.
And as a parent, we feel discomfort over our child's challenges or suffering, perceived or real. And therefore, we want to step in so that we don't feel uncomfortable anymore, the
Yes.
adult. And
Yes.
so you do have to get a little bit uncomfortable with being uncomfortable with this I philosophy. And I know I had kind of something where my child had her homecoming dance coming up. My kiddo's a teenager,
Okay.
and I gave her a budget. It was $100 for the homecoming dance. If you want to find out what happens, you're going to have to tune in to this part 3 of the 100th episode of the Harness the Power of Planning podcast, where my friend Christine and I round up what we had talked about in the first 2 parts of the podcast. And then we talk about how to bring about a goal of hers that is a little bit more ephemeral than the other goals I discussed on this podcast, which is raising resilient children. All of this starting now. Okay, and now I'm bringing on my friend Christine. Hi, Christine.
Hi.
Can you center yourself a little bit more in the camera? You're just a little bit off. I don't know that it'll make a huge difference to viewers, but just
is that a little bit better?
Yeah, that's a little bit better.
Great.
Hi. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you, and happy 100th episode.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, I can't. It's amazing that it's here.
It is, yeah. And happy birthday.
So what was it? When did I start this podcast? I think my first episode was in 2018. So it took 7 years to get here. And there were a couple years where it was not really active, but I'm so glad I'm doing it. I feel like it's really been beneficial in so many different ways. And yeah, thanks for being here. I always love having your insight. So did you have any thoughts on what you were listening to, by the way, as the roundup person?
Yeah, I mean, I made a little note here, just honestly for myself, that the reoccurring theme, I think, around our goal has to be, what is the specific steps that you're going to take? And are they going to be sustainable? So, are they going to be realistic? And then just doing it consistently. I think that's, at least for me personally, I always have great ideas and I think, oh, this is a very easy thing to do. It's not going to take a lot of effort. And I do it each day. And then maybe like day 6 or 7, it drops off. And so I think, from what I heard in some of the advice that you shared, is that consistency is key. And it can be little. Yes. That way it doesn't have to feel overwhelming, and it can be sustainable. So I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can build up to it.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think when I had decided to pick up, so I was doing the podcast very regularly, I think in 2018, 2019. And then it kind of fell off because it just didn't seem as important to my business that was existing at the time. And then when I started Beyond Your Wildest Dreams and Harness the Power of Planning, I decided that it was important again. So I picked it back up. And I think I was only doing it once a month at first. And then I kind of built up to this rhythm of doing it once a week. And so, yeah, it was also a steady, small step, getting used to it. Okay, I can take on a little bit more sort of thing.
Sure. Well, and like we've discussed, right, the brain science says that in order to create that habit, you have to create the consistency. So, your head says, oh, yeah, this is just something I'm going to do without thinking about it, like getting up in the morning and brushing your teeth, things that become almost, you just don't even really necessarily think about it as a chore. It's just a good idea, and you've created a habit.
Yeah, and it's become just a block on my, I know Thursday from 9 a.m. to around 1 p.m. my time is just this block of time that I work on creating the podcast and then slicing and dicing it and uploading it and creating marketing around it and then doing a newsletter. Like I have this whole workflow. And so kind of automates, I have these blocks in my week that are just kind of automated where, sometimes the hardest thing is deciding to do something. And then once you decide to do it, the next step is you have to follow through with it. And when you make it
Yes.
a reoccurring thing, it makes it a little bit easier to follow through with it because you're like, I've already decided to do this thing. I'm not thinking about it anymore. Now I'm in doing mode.
I'm doing it. Yeah. And I liked what you said to Angela about it could just be something as simple as you're just making your bed. And
30 seconds.
you don't necessarily realize the connections that you're making on a deeper level, right?
Mhm.
That begin to set the stage for success in a bunch of
Mhm.
other areas. And so I like that. It doesn't have to be an overly complicated, overwhelming action plan. It can be something as simple as make your bed.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that roundup. I love it. So, tell me about your goal that you are working towards.
So, something that's become important to me now that I have, an 8 and 10-year-old is really thinking about how can I ensure my kids have the tools to become, I guess the word that kind of always pops up for me is resiliency.
Mhm.
How
Mhm.
can I ensure that they're feeling like whatever life throws at them, whether it's something as simple as kids being mean in school, or a teacher giving them some tough feedback, to know that that doesn't have to be the end of the world. It doesn't have to be a difficult conversation that results in damage, so to speak, right? But that because they're resilient, they are going to be able to recover quickly
Mhm.
from a difficult situation, ideally learn from it and be equipped. So when I'm not around, they know how to advocate for themselves. They know how to hear constructive criticism. They know how to share that with others. So, again,
Mhm.
the word that keeps popping up in my head is resiliency.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's the right word. I know that there's this push-pull between, we just have this innate desire to keep our child safe,
Yes.
but keeping them safe, there's a fine line between keeping them safe and kind of coddling them in a way that they don't develop any skills for themselves because they just think that you're gonna do the thing all
Yes,
the time.
yes. I think, something that I had shared with you that maybe your listeners might be interested in is the example where, my daughter really almost did not walk down some stairs on her own, looked as though she just wasn't capable, and she said she was afraid. It scared her, the gaps in between the stairs. And I think, you talk to some parents that are like, then you're gentle and you take their hand and you put your arm around them and you guide them and you remind them that they're not alone. And something I just felt strongly about is I think fear is normal. We've talked about this as, cavemen, when you hear noises in the woods,
Mhm,
running away from that noise because it could be a predator that may attack you is normal, and
mhm.
acting on that fear. I think, being able to go downstairs is an important skill. And I said to Cora, I just the main reason why I want us to move quickly from this space or from this feeling is that God forbid there's a fire or God forbid there's an
Mhm,
emergency. I want you to just simply have the confidence
mhm.
to walk downstairs quickly. I want you to be able to do it on your own in
Yeah,
case I'm not there, or an adult or a teacher. And so this is something that I want to nip in the bud. And
right.
I think that, sometimes when you're reading the parenting books and you're talking with other parents, you will hear parents say, well, I just might put my kid on my back and make it a fun piggyback ride down the stairs.
Mhm.
And I want to instead think about how do I equip my kids with the tools for
Yeah.
them to be able to know that they're absolutely capable of doing that by themselves.
Yes. Yes. And I think one of the challenges in our culture is that we're uncomfortable being uncomfortable.
Yes.
And as a parent, we feel discomfort over our child's challenges or suffering, perceived or real, and therefore we wanna step in so that we don't feel uncomfortable anymore, the
Yes.
adult. And
Yes.
so you do have to get a little bit uncomfortable with being uncomfortable in this with this, I philosophy. And I know I had kind of something where, my child had her homecoming dance coming up. My kiddo's a teenager,
Okay.
and I gave her a budget. It was $100 for the homecoming dance because I wanted to give her, enough money that she could work with budgeting, but not so much money that she could afford to buy new shoes, new dress, get her hair done, get her
Hmm.
nails done, all of the things. And so she said to me, she really likes fancy nails. And I never do my nails. Literally, it's one of the things I never do.
Hmm.
And she said, I want the fake nails, like the long fake nails with all the designs." And
Yeah.
I said, "Well, I think that might actually be your entire $100. So, if that's what you're interested in, you should start calling around, see how much it costs, and make an appointment."
Yeah.
And she was like, "Oh, mom, can you do it?" Just giving me this like, "Oh, that sounds horrible. Like, I'm so uncomfortable with that idea." And I
Sure.
said, "Nope. If you want that." I mean, and this was one of those things that was kinda easy for me to say because I am not a nail person, and I kind of it's not how I would spend my time or money. So it was kind of easy for me to be like, "Nope. If you wanna do that, you're gonna have to do that on your own."
Sure. Sure.
And she wanted it enough, so she kept putting it off. She kept putting it off because we were talking about this. I gave her a budget, I think 2 months before the dance because I wanted to give her the opportunity to get the dress and shoes and stuff maybe for free through our Buy Nothing group, and
Okay.
so that was something that, she did end up doing, was not spending money on those because she was able to get them through our Buy Nothing group. If you don't know what Buy Nothing is, that's outside the scope of this, but you should
Right.
definitely watch other episodes and look up Buy Nothing groups because 'cause they're great. And so she had the money to do these crazy nails, but she kept putting it off, kept putting it off.
Hmm.
And finally, she made the call 48 hours before the dance. She finally wanted it so bad that she was willing to get over her discomfort. And she called 3 places. None of them had availability.
Right.
And we talked about I said, "So was that as hard as you thought it was going to be?" And she was like, "No, it wasn't as hard." And, "So next time what have you learned from this?" And she's like, "I'm gonna do it a lot earlier next time."
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that if you had done that for her, you're not teaching her that right, what happens when you wait.
Mhm.
You're not allowing her to take responsibility for something that really she wants. It's not
Yes.
something you wanted. In
Nope.
fact, you would have even been great to be like, no nails, spend your
Mhm.
money maybe over here.
Mhm.
And I think oftentimes, parents, they will insert themselves and maybe take up room or take up the space.
Mhm.
And then I think it there is no space left for your child to step into some discomfort. And I liked what you said. I wrote that down so I could remember, the swallow the frog,
Mm.
the discomfort is okay. We talked about, with fitness. Imagine, you walk into a gym and you look at the equipment and you say, oh, that looks too hard. Oh, I don't know how to use that equipment. That one doesn't really seem for me. And then, 30 minutes you walk out and you haven't done anything, right? Most
Right.
most people would say, that doesn't make any sense. Like, you have to get on the machine, you have to figure it out. It's gonna hurt. It's not gonna feel great. The
Yeah.
next day you might even be really sore, but the benefit of that obviously is what we're talking about. And so I often say to the kids, Yeah, I know it's uncomfortable to do this. I know it doesn't feel great, but can you please trust me that when I'm not around to do it for you, you're going to feel really good and
Mhm.
empowered about doing
Mhm.
these difficult things yourself. And as you know, I studied psychology. That's my degree, and I had always
Mhm.
imagined pursuing that. And I think that it became a little bit disconcerting when I thought about the idea that, wow, maybe some people never want to face their discomfort. They always want to simply just talk about how tough things are. And I want to make sure that, my kids are feeling that, yes, it's absolutely okay to talk about how hard things are, but that they're always thinking about what is a way to move forward and
Yes.
get past that discomfort and be stronger as a result of it.
Well, and what's interesting about this goal is that this is not the same kind of goal as we talked about with Natasha and Angela, where it's kind of something that you can circle and build steps to. This is more of you have to have a certain mindset around how you're going
Yeah.
to approach your interactions with your child and remind yourself. So I feel like this is the kind of goal where you might just have to, where you might be helped by maybe like writing a kind of a letter to yourself. Like,
Hmm.
this is the kind of parent I wanna be because I wanna raise my children to be, um, able to stand up for themselves, able to pick themselves up when things are going difficult, able to learn from their situations, to have a growth mindset, right? So
Yeah.
those are, just to kinda help you crystallize what it is that you're working towards because it's a slightly more ephemeral goal, and
Sure. But I
so I
like
think
that letter idea. That's
yeah, so to
something.
write a letter, so you can
Yeah.
think about what it is that you really want, what are the characteristics that you're really hoping to cultivate in your child, and
Yeah.
then to also say, to that end, what I am going to do is to be sure to, right, like, 1, give them opportunities to solve problems for themselves, right? 2, recognize that my discomfort is separate from their discomfort
Yes.
and you know like
Yeah.
sometimes you just need to name the things in order to move beyond it.
Yeah, and I like what you said about, I think oftentimes parents, teachers, caregivers in general are highly motivated by their own discomfort and wanting to not feel it immediately. And sometimes
Mhm.
the best or the fastest way to not have to feel that is to intervene
Mhm.
because, right, you tend to have the authority. For example, if there's an issue with a school teacher, you tend to kind of be able to not get your way. That doesn't sound right, but to resolve it quickly. And of
Right.
course, as children are learning, that may take more than one conversation.
Mhm.
And that your child may come back home and it hasn't necessarily been resolved, and then you need to continue the conversation. But that's okay. And I think you're right.
Yes.
I think in this letter that I'm writing, and what you said specifically about carving out my discomfort
Mhm.
and putting it over here. Because, the other thing, as children are incredibly resilient to begin with. They
Right.
can move past things very quickly. But if we begin to chip away at, I think, what is probably some innate skill
Mhm.
in handling things on their own, then
Right.
I think that's where we start to see young adults really struggle.
Yeah.
So I think
It's
it's
second guessing
nurturing,
themselves.
second guessing themselves, second guessing
Mhm.
themselves. So I think it's taking probably a skill that they do have, because we've all read those extraordinary stories about kids who've survived in extraordinary circumstances with
Right.
little to no help
Right.
from others. So we know it's there. I do believe it's innate. And so I can add that to my letter. How do I nurture that, not stifle it?
Yes. Yes. So, And, the other thing too is that I
Yeah.
feel like this whole, wanting being uncomfortable with being uncomfortable is kind of related to something else that comes naturally to parents, which is when there's something that needs to happen and your kid is responsible for it, but it's quote unquote easier for you to just do it, or it's faster for you to just do it.
Hmm.
And then they never get to own the responsibility or develop the skills for that thing. Like, for instance, one of these things is cooking. It is challenging teaching a child to cook, but you're gonna put in the work at some point, and either you're gonna put in the work teaching the child to cook, or you're gonna put in
Hmm.
the work preparing all the meals for your child because you never taught them to cook.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
it was something that I did with my kiddo very purposefully at a very young age, and she was responsible for making one dinner a night as early as I think she started doing it at 11 or 12. I don't remember when
I
I
love
was like, "Okay,
that.
you
Yeah.
can start taking this on." Um, but yeah, it took work for me to get there, but now I'm reaping the benefit because she's a great cook already
Yeah.
at not even 15.
Yeah. And don't I recall correctly that even at a very young age, you didn't have, like, for example, separate kid knives, right?
No,
You
we
instead,
never had good knives.
right,
And
you taught, right, your
yes.
kiddo, like, let's just learn the proper way to use this because you can, in fact, cut yourself. And I think that, again, trusting that your children actually are incredibly capable.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely think there are a lot of unintended consequences that pop up with some of the things that we've done for quote unquote safety.
Hmm.
Like for instance, we only use glass bottles, and we only used glass bottles because and glass cups. She never had plastic sippy cups or anything like that. For health reasons, which I'm really glad now because now we're finding out all the microplastics that are lodged in our brain and stuff like that.
Right.
But, I also did it for environmental reasons, all sorts of reasons. But the thing that I noticed was my kid never threw her cups or bottles. And I think it's because, like, they were heavy, and also maybe she'd seen glass break at some point and she knew what the consequences were.
Sure.
Whereas, like,
There was already
there's
that awareness.
yeah, there's something fun about throwing a plastic thing because, like, it bounces and it is kind of like a toy.
Yeah.
And,
They get to
just
watch you go pick it up and bring it back like a dog with fetch.
yeah, whatever. So I definitely feel like there's some unintended consequences that come with these choices, that maybe you don't want those consequences. So maybe we need to rethink those choices.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think the whole like, oh, it's faster and easier if I just do it is definitely has a lot of unintended consequences that come with it later down the line.
Agreed. Yeah. I spent 20 years in human resources sitting across the table from recent college grads. And I had one college grad have his mother call me because he didn't like where he was sitting.
Oh
I
my
remember
gosh.
having to tell the
No.
mother to never call me again about things
How
like that.
inappropriate.
Yeah. And, so I see a lot of what happens when we are so incredibly protective and cushioning our children from difficult things and inserting ourselves in handling things for them. I see what happens to them as young adults. They simply don't
Mm,
have the skill set. And so I think, we're as much as we're well intended when they're young,
yes.
it really is doing a disservice for them.
Cautionary tales. Oh my gosh, I could keep talking forever. I'm just gonna bring Angela back because I know Angela, hopefully you're ready to I'm just gonna bring Angela back. I wasn't planning on bringing Angela back, but she's here in the green room, so I just wanted to bring her back.
Hi,
Thank you so
Angela.
much. That was oh gosh. Okay, the two of you do not start doing your thing. So
You're gonna cut us off?
yeah, right now. So this went way longer than I expected, but it was such a great conversation. I didn't want to cut any of the conversations off. I had so much fun. Thank you so much for being here. I
Thank
love
you.
having you in my life.
You?
And to those of you watching right now, thank you for joining us for the 100th episode of the Harness the Power of Planning I'm going to say goodbye to my friends right now so that I can just close this out. And thank you so much for joining me for this episode. If you are ready to take your planning journey to the next level, go to my website, bywdreams.com. You can find out about all my books and courses there. If you want to work with me personally, reach out to me. We could figure that out as well. And remember that planning makes everything easier. Bye. Thanks for listening to the Harness the Power of Planning podcast. Be sure to rate and subscribe wherever you listen.